The diner was crowded. When Ethan Cole walked in wearing a tailored suit and a smirk that made people move out of his way. He was one of those billionaires who liked to blend in just to feel normal for an hour. He ordered black coffee, and when the waitress came over with her notepad, he looked up and said with teasing charm, "Tell me, miss, if you had $1 billion, how would you invest it?" The other customers laughed, thinking he was joking, but she didn't. Her name was Lily, and her uniform was faded at the edges, but her eyes were sharp. She tilted her head slightly and said, "I wouldn't invest it, I'd divide it." The laughter stopped. Ethan blinked. "Divide it," he repeated. She nodded calmly. "I'd keep enough to live a simple life and use the rest to build something that lasts, because money doesn't matter if it dies with you." The room fell silent. Ethan's grin faded, replaced by genuine curiosity. He asked softly, "And what would you build?" She smiled. "A place where people don't have to choose between food and rent." For the first time in years, Ethan didn't have a response. He sipped his coffee quietly, watching this young woman talk about survival as if it were strategy, when his assistant whispered, "Sir, we should leave." For the meeting, Ethan waved him off. "No, let her talk," he said. Lily didn't notice who he was. She only saw a tired man with questions. She told him about her father losing his job, the night she worked double shifts to keep their home, and how she'd learned to make $5 stretch like 50. Ethan listened, really listened, until his phone buzzed again, pulling him back to the world he had built on numbers, not people. He stood up, left a large tip, and said, "You're wasted here, Lily, I hope. One day you'll tell that to the right person." Then he walked out, but the thought of her words followed him long after the laughter had stopped. That night, Ethan sat in his penthouse surrounded by glass walls and silence. The city lights stretched below like a sea of gold, but he couldn't stop hearing her voice. "I wouldn't invest it, I'd divide it." It sounded simple, yet it shook something inside him. He had spent years multiplying his wealth, yet somehow everything around him felt smaller, lonelier. He poured himself a drink, but even that tasted empty. He opened his laptop to review merger reports and paused on the company name of a small housing charity, one that had been on the edge of bankruptcy for months. The next morning, his driver waited outside the same diner. The assistant looked confused as Ethan stepped out without warning again, dressed in the same expensive coat. The staff froze when they saw him return. Lily nearly dropped a tray as he smiled and said, "Mind if I join? Yeah, this time." She blinked, unsure what to say, until he sat across from her like they were equals. "You never told me your full plan," he said, leaning forward. "You said you'd divide the money. What would you do with the part that helps others?" She hesitated, then opened her notebook filled with messy handwriting sketches of houses and notes about community programs. "I want to build affordable homes for single parents and job centers for people who lost everything like my dad." Ethan studied the pages, quietly, every line showing more thought than most of his company proposals. When she finally stopped talking, he said, "You know, this is the first plan I've seen in years that feels real." She laughed, thinking he was teasing, but his tone stayed serious. "I want to fund this." He slid his card across the table and added, "This isn't charity, Lily, this is partnership." Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at the card and then at him. "Who are you really?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. A man who thought he understood money until he met someone who actually does. Word spread fast through the diner that the billionaire from the papers had returned, but no one knew why Lily spent the next few days torn between disbelief and fear. Her friends told her it was a trap, but something about Ethan's quiet sincerity stayed with her. A week later, she found herself standing in a towering glass building, holding a visitor badge with her name on it. The receptionist smiled as if expecting her. "Mr. Cole is waiting inside," she said. Lily walked through the heavy doors, her heart racing. Ethan stood by the window, looking out over the skyline. When he turned, his expression wasn't smug anymore. It was calm, grounded. He gestured toward a folder on the table, saying, "I've been reading your notes. I want to start with your housing idea, but I need you to lead it." She blinked, startled. "I'm not qualified, I'm a waitress." Ethan shook his head. "You're the only one who talked about people, not profit. That's what leadership is." Lily felt her throat tighten. She had never imagined being seen like that. He added softly, "You reminded me of my mother. She used to work nights at a diner too. She gave me my first dollar and told me never to forget where. It came from I did forget until you said divide it. For a moment they both stood silent, the city stretching endless behind them. Then Ethan said, "So what do you say, partner?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled the same fearless smile she had. That first day when she challenged a billionaire without knowing who he was, she took a deep breath and said, "Let's build something that lasts." Ethan nodded with quiet pride, knowing that for the first time in his life, he was investing in something. That couldn't be measured in numbers but in change. Months passed and the project began to grow faster than anyone expected. News outlets started calling it the most honest charity of the decade, but to Lily, it was more than that. It was her dream, taking shape brick by brick. She walked through the first construction site wearing a hard hat and dirt on her shoes, while workers smiled and called her boss. Ethan visited often, but this time he didn't arrive in suits or with bodyguards. He wore plain shirts, carried blueprints, and listened to every worker like they mattered. One afternoon, while they watched a team finish painting the walls, Ethan turned to her and said, "Do you know why I first asked you that question?" She shook her head. He smiled because I thought it would make me laugh seeing how a stranger would spend my fortune. But instead, you made me realize how poor I was without purpose. Lily looked at him, her voice low and warm. Maybe that's how life works. It humbles the ones who think they have everything and raises the ones who never stopped believing. He nodded quietly, then handed her a folder. "This is the deed," he said. "It's all in your name now." She froze. "What do you mean?" "It's your vision," he replied. "I'm just helping it grow." Tears filled her eyes as she looked around at the laughter of families moving into their new homes, the smell of fresh paint mixed with the sound of children running through the halls. It didn't feel like money anymore, it felt like meaning. She turned to Ethan and said, "You gave me everything I ever wanted." He shook his head gently. "No, you just reminded me what everything really means. If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings."